afternoon and welcome to City Club. I'm Jill Bernstein, Vice President of City Club, and standing in today for President Alison Roberts, who is having a warm, well-deserved bit of travel in the south of Portugal. I know. She'll be back next month to tell us all about her adventures and maybe share some of the vitamin D. I do want to acknowledge that this beautiful venue is the ancestral home of the Coast Salish people who have lived in the Salish Basin since time immemorial. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors for their enduring care and protection of this land. You know, I'm proud to serve on the board for City Club because I believe so deeply in our mission. At City Club, we envision a Bellingham where people from every part of our community come together to do better, come together to better understand public issues, engage with diverse perspectives, and feel genuinely connected to the civic life of the place we call home. We advance this vision by offering regular in-person forums with high-quality speakers, shared meals, and a welcoming environment that encourages curiosity, connection, and informed civic engagement. I believe it is Bellingham's finest forum for civic discourse. There are lots of volunteers who offer their time and ideas to create and execute these programs. Please join me in thanking them for all of their efforts. There is also another group that provides support, our financial sponsors. When you look at your table, you'll see a list of them. They are making all of this possible and helping to make this great programming continue in the manner in which we've handled things since our inception. There are many costs connected to presenting these programs, including, but not limited to, the venue, the videographer, our sound personnel, and without our sponsors, it would not be possible for us to continue with these high-quality monthly programs. You will find a list of them on your table on one of these nice little placards, and I urge you to personally thank these sponsors and to offer your support to their businesses with your shopping dollars. Can you join the list and become a sponsor? Or do you know of a business or an organization that can join us? And please let Jim know, plaid shirt Jim Britton know. And he will help you to become a part of this important group. It would really be meaningful to us and help us help support the organization going forward. I'm curious, is there anybody here today who is not a member? Oh, raise your hands. There you go. You're hiding back there. You will see on your table the opportunity to fill out a form to become a member today. It's so easy to do. And I would tell you that if you join us today, we have a special deal for you. The difference between a guest lunch and a member lunch is $10. And if you see Zach with a green shirt, who is sitting by the door, who is handling all of the money today before leaving, and join us today, your first year's dues will be reduced by $10. That's great, right? You can also join when you get home by going to bellinghamcityclub.org and or filling out this form that's on your on the table. So easy to do. And you'll be a part of about a 300-member organization that is really having these informed civic conversations every month. You know, I'm also a member, in addition to being on the board of directors, a member of the program committee, and we plan our programs months in advance, so we are a little concerned about how prescient we have become. For instance, next month's program is carrying a title of $1 billion challenge, the Nooksack River, today and tomorrow. This will have a focus on the human and financial costs of the floods and what we can do to remediate the effects of flooding moving into the future. And we are really hoping that we are not perfectly prescient as the following month, our focus will be on authoritarianism. These are going to be outstanding programs, and you will not want to miss them. And in addition to the $10 discount, they are a reason to see Zach before leaving the room. As a housekeeping measure, be careful if you're in the chairs that are on the mezzanine, I guess we'll call it, because we don't want to block the exit in this crowded room. And today, without further ado, I want to just tell you again, being as prescient as the programming committee is, our speakers will be Hart, Hodges, and James McCafferty. James, I'm going to get it, of Western Center for Economic and Business Research, and they're going to provide information and evaluations of how the economy is doing nationally, statewide, and locally, including current trends for the cost of living, tariffs, and the national debt. A presentation I'm sure they have had to rewrite and write again against the backdrop of the explosive events happening on the national stage. Introducing them and properly pronouncing their names will be Chris Roselli. Chris told me that he had a 4-page bio talking about himself that he wanted me to read. He wanted me to be sure I gave you every detail. And instead, I'm just going to say that Chris is just a wonderful guy, a longtime member of Bellingham City Club, and is working as the Director of Community Relations at Western, where he serves as the liaison between the community and the university by fostering positive relationships with local governments, surrounding neighborhoods, civic and community-based organizations, and the local business community. Please join me in welcoming Chris and our esteemed speakers.
Thank you, Jane. That is much better than the long version. My name's Chris Roselli, Community Relations at Western. Thank you, Jane, as she said. Hold on. Sorry. I just have to check my 401k. Okay, not bad today. That's okay. All right, hold on. Let me just check my 401k. Uh-oh. Not so good anymore. All right. Well, the economy is a consistent top driver in the president's approval ratings, and most recent Reuters Ipsos poll shows President Trump's approval is declining to 36%, down from 40% last week. Much of this drop is tied to economic concerns, particularly rising gas prices, which I'm sure James and Hart will talk about. Just 25% of Americans approve of the president's handling of the cost of living, which was a central issue in his 2024 campaign. And only 29% approve of his overall economic leadership, which is a historic low. Overall, 63% of Americans describe the economy as weak, reflecting broad concerns across political lines. And based on these polls, Americans are certainly concerned about the economy at the national level. Here in Washington state, lawmakers face a multi-billion-dollar budget gap and recently passed a millionaire's tax, imposing a 9.9% levy on income above $1 million, representing a major policy shift for a state without a traditional income tax. And I know that worries all of you in here, given that all of you make more than $1 million a year. Now, closer to home here in Whatcom County, we are also experiencing many of these pressures as well. Tourism is down, local business revenues are declining, and public entities from schools to cities and to the county are making budget cuts. And of course, as we all know, housing affordability just reached a critical point, which is now the worst in the Puget Sound region when comparing home prices to incomes. It feels like things are heading in the wrong direction, but actually, are they? It feels that way. However, as the celebrated 20th century economist Paul Samuelson once observed, the stock market has predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions. It reminds us that perception doesn't always match reality. So how should we interpret what we are seeing and feeling? How long will this last? Well, today we are thrilled to have Hart Hodges and James McCafferty of Western Washington University's Center for Economic and Business Research. CBER is an applied research center within the College of Business and Economics at Western that provides data analyses, economic forecasting, and customized research to businesses, governments, and nonprofits. Hart and James have brought their expertise and their crystal ball to help us better understand the true state of the economy. Please join me in welcoming James and Hart to Bellingham City Club.
I always feel like we should talk a lot about feelings. So I don't know. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Awesome.
Am I on as well? Thank you, Chris.
So we're going to talk about feelings today. Is that what it is?
Well, Chris said we were going to tell everybody when some of these things were going to change. I'm not sure that we can answer all of the questions about when, but we're going to dive in, start with the U.S. forecast, and then a couple of tangents. We're going to have to figure out how to comment to talk about some of the, I think, unavoidable, very big picture items before we get into Washington and the Whatcom economy. Please interrupt us. I mean, I know see, that's why I bring him. He does that sort of thing all the time. We know the regular format is a presentation and then Q&A. It's going to be a lot easier, I think, for all of us if you go ahead and interrupt. You can raise a hand. You can throw something at James. Anything to get our attention. But partly, if we're talking about a topic where you have a question, whether it's a particular war or a tariff or something else, ask it when that comes up rather than it getting at the end going, you had a slide, and so on and so forth.
Our Penn and Teller Act is not going to go well here.
All right. So we'll jump in. So S&P Global Insights offers monthly forecasts for the U.S., and we're going to start there in part because when you think about our region, a lot of times you can say, you give me the national forecast and tell me a little bit about what's going to go on with technology, Microsoft, Amazon, maybe a little bit about Boeing as a proxy for manufacturing. I'll add that plus or minus to the U.S. forecast to get a regional forecast. So we're going to start here. And the forecast released this morning, GDP growth is, and I don't know if you can see the numbers in the back. So 2.5% GDP growth.
Hart?
What?
I don't think so. When we unpack that 2.5,
I'm on the first slide. And you're still,
I know, but
right.
Almost 1% of that is AI technology investment, which may or may not happen. It's a lot of money, and some of it will definitely happen. So some, okay. If our oil fund continues, that may be up to another 0.5 of GDP. So really, this number is probably in the ones.
And we'll come back and have you help us ask some questions about that. But James, unemployment. We used to think about 5% as being roughly the natural rate of unemployment. How are we below that? So we're going to have to unpack what's going on in unemployment. PCE, you'll be quizzed on this later. Personal Consumption Expenditures Index. It's what the Federal Reserve uses instead of the CPI. Right. So
It's far better.
close to 3%. The Federal Reserve wants to see 2%.
And our fund with oil may push that even higher. Europe's above around 3.5 or so for this year so far is what they're suggesting.
And just in terms of what might happen with interest rates, S&P is predicting 2 cuts, but not starting until summer at the earliest.
Meanwhile, the stock market's thinking maybe a rate hike.
No, we'll see. When we talk about the national economy, you've all heard, I think, about the K economy. There's even articles right now about the E economy, and people are not sure.
Are economists just slow? We have to use shapes? Is that what it is?
We like the graphics. So for those in the back, the upward sloping bluish line, S&P 500, because it always goes up. And then the orange line is consumer sentiment. And so the graphic is highlighting the divergence between the two. And we're thinking the K economy is that for some, the economy is in an upward trajectory. For others, not so much. And this graphic just helps us introduce that idea.
So I was recently at a conference when the White House economist spoke, and he talked about how this K-shape, he didn't think that was a thing. And of course, from his ears to someone else's ears, mouth to his ears, I don't know, there's mouths and ears there. His belief was we didn't have this problem because on average, we were fine. Household income's going up, spending's going up. On average, we're okay. Now, I had just happened to be sitting with a bunch of people from the Dallas Fed, and they remarked, yeah, if an economist stands with one foot in boiling hot water and the other foot in a block of ice, on average, he's okay.
So we want you to think about this graphic in a particular way, in that whether it's a war in Iran,
Michigan? I mean, says,
no, sorry, good question. It's the University of Michigan that does the U.S. Consumer Sentiment Survey, but I think it's true in Michigan.
Give her a cookie. First question.
But this divergence isn't caused by the war in Iran, wasn't caused by COVID, but a lot of events like that magnify it or accelerate it. More on that in just a second. Part of what's happening, so on the left side, growth in the sort of the difference in who's spending, who's driving consumption in the U.S. economy. More and more and more, it's the top 20%. And
well, worse than that, Hart, it's the top 20% of the people that households with assets, the top 20%, but it's really about half of them that are driving the spending.
so back to your, on average, things look good because major metrics like consumer spending, which is a huge part of GDP, holding up just fine, but driven by a smaller and smaller number. On the right, S&P 500 returns. I guess I lied. It doesn't always go up, but it's gone up a lot lately. And so the wealth, and we could play with what's happening with the dispersion of wealth in the U.S. and so on. I mentioned this isn't because of COVID or just since COVID, and it's not because of the war in Iran. Here's a little bit of fun. For those of you in the back, 6 maps of the U.S., starting in 1992, top left, and then every 4 years, elections. So from the left, blue counties are counties that went heavily Democratic. Red counties are the ones that went heavily Republican. We have a very long-standing sort of development in terms of where is the economy working well for people? Where are people finding jobs, finding money, finding income, finding wealth? Where are people struggling? And the angst that comes from lack of jobs, lack of opportunity, anger at others. So this K has been around for quite a while.
And of course, part of the, back to our feelings, a lot of that red space is empty land, right? So this isn't, it's not a density map. It's a land map. Very different things.
All right, so we started with that U.S. outlook. James, you mentioned AI spending.
There's a little bit of that going on.
So data centers. And we're going to have to talk about what does AI do to the job market going forward. We're already hearing about layoffs. Are they AI driven? What's happening? But I think we'll follow a little tangent to Iran. Because in that forecast that the S&P put out, if you look down deeper, or the official forecast for Washington or others, oil is $60 a barrel or less. So you might want to start.
When you walked up, it was a little over 90.
I'm going to have to check my 401k. I'm going to have to check the price of oil. And the reason I said we can't really tell you when things are going to change, right? What's the economic impact of the war in Iran? You tell me when it's going to end.
Under what terms? It's the uncertainty, folks, that makes this game really hard. And it makes it really hard for businesses to decide any long-term commitment to investment, right? It's why that AI investment is somewhat questionable at the scale, because there's too much uncertainty to put down billions and billions of dollars and not know for sure that it's going to work out.
And my question is, how about military spending? Is it included?
What about military spending? We can repeat. You're okay. Military spending is really interesting because there's a military budget, right? So that's a known quantity. And now we're being asked to, spend, I don't know how many billions of dollars a day right now.
Couple hundred.
Will that be appropriated? How will it be spent? Over what length of time? So the economic impacts of military spending actually are long-term. Some of the things that the cruise missiles, for example, I've learned a lot. The cruise missiles, they only build a handful of those a year. So to replace the ones that we've used will literally take almost a decade. So economic impact, some, but not phenomenally big bumps.
I can walk a microphone over there if we would like that.
But the economic impact of the military spending is, in terms of the numbers, a positive. Right? GDP is not adjusted for, you can fill in the blank. It's not adjusted for environmental issues. It's not adjusted for crime. It's not adjusted for, it's just a measure of spending. So I'll leave it at that. I will.
We have one more question, Hart.
All right.
I guess my question would be not only when the war ends, but how does it end?
Exactly. It's the terms, right? So how does that mean? Like right now, the Strait of Hormuz, we're allowing pretty much everything but U.S. vessels through it right now, this morning. Now, is that going to be true tonight? I don't know.
Speaking of the Strait of Hormuz, this is a graphic of transit calls through the strait, and they've dropped basically to zero, except for a few ships, some natural gas. One thing to think about is if 20% of seaborne oil is passing through the strait, there is no alternative. Right? There are other choke points in terms of global oil movements, Strait of Malacca, for example. If you were to close that, everything's delayed a little bit by a matter of 2 to 3 days, but there are options. There really isn't an option for moving oil out of the region without using the Strait of Hormuz. So it's...
Well, and the oil is the attractive person at the dance that gets all the attention. Folks, you're not talking about all the other really cool stuff that goes through there, like fertilizer. Right?
Or,
fertilizer is going to potentially vastly increase your cost of food for the next 12 months from a short closure because the farmers can't apply it later. It has to go on now. So it's not, oil's big, but
don't think just about your price of gas.
I've argued with reporters for the last 3 weeks. It's not about gas. The issues are so much broader.
What are other sources of fertilizer?
So a vast majority of, and I'm going to screw this up because I'm not a chemist. Urea and sulfur, is that what it's an
And some of
S.
the potash from places like Canada.
Yeah, almost all of it is produced in that region for the world. And so we saw something similar in Ukraine around cooking oil because almost all of the world's sunflower oil is produced in Ukraine. And it caused the cooking oil market to completely change across the world very quickly. So we're seeing the same thing with fertilizer. Even at Costco last week, I noticed that consumer grade fertilizer is about $15 more a bag. So imagine being a farmer trying to plant peas, I understand right now.
Well, there are other places, potash from Canada, but it takes a long time to ramp up the production.
What about the issue of helium? I understand that goes through there.
Helium is part of natural gas. So that is actually very regional in nature. Natural gas is interesting. So Europe is seeing huge spikes in LNG costs. We haven't seen it here in the U.S. at a producer level. You've seen it at the consumer level, but not at the producer level because we actually have a massive surplus in the U.S. We can't export it. We don't have the capacity, the port capacity to move it. So we're actually burning off excess LNG. Also gives capacity to that. Meanwhile, you as a consumer are paying market rates for the same product.
Okay, we can come back to the war much as you want, but we're going to jump to tariffs because it's something else that we have to make guesses about when we think about the economic impact. How large of a tariff? How long will it last? On what countries? And so on and so forth. You've talked a little bit about regional, some of the port issues.
Yeah, I did a bunch of research around tariff impacts on ports. So if the tariffs stay at the level they are currently, and they've been now for a short time, and they're slightly higher than they were before the Supreme Court said you can't do it. Long story. We're talking about impacting about 60,000 U.S. jobs at ports or the next steps. So think about rail lines, truck drivers. We're not talking about retail. We're not talking about warehousing, all the other fun things that happen. We're just talking about 60,000 jobs there. In the Puget Sound region, it's actually closer to a little over 4,000 jobs because the Port of Seattle has been impacted much more severely by tariffs because a lot of the cargo that would have been going to Seattle has actually been redirected to Vancouver. And we're seeing the same thing at other ports in the Gulf along the East Coast. It's these mid-sized ports like Seattle, Tacoma, that have really been impacted by this. And that change in freight passage is likely to stick. Same thing with stuff coming out of LA has gone to Mexico, and then it's being shipped into the United States by rail and by truck. It's likely to stick because it once you move the ship's paths and routings, all that stuff is planned way in advance. And so they're just going to do that. So what they're doing is they're doing what companies have always done is they're looking for the least cost path. And so by importing into Canada or Mexico, they're able to bring it in under the formerly known as NAFTA, the USMCA. They're bringing it in that way at a lower cost, which is why we're getting the pressure now to dump those trade agreements, right? Which is just, again, going to increase the costs for you going to the store to buy things.
All right, I'm going to get a little bit wonky. Bear with me. You'll be tested on this shortly. So I've stolen some slides from a colleague at the San Francisco Fed who was doing some research on tariffs and what are the likely impacts of the current Trump administration's tariffs. So the equation is I've got an import price that's on the left that's going to be a function of the exchange rate, the tax, or the tariff, and the manufacturer or the exporter's price. So if you're going to ask, what do I think is going to happen with the tariffs, you've got to make some assumptions about, well, how much is the producer going to change their price? Can they lower it and effectively absorb the tariffs? Will the impact of the tariff be offset by changes in exchange rates or made worse by changes in exchange rates? And then once it gets to the importer, what do they do to their price? Right, so there's lots of layers. And last spring, Liberation Day, last summer, there was lots of attempts to say, well, what is going to happen here? So we'll look back briefly at the first Trump administration's tariffs. So one of the consequences was that tariffs went on. There were no changes to the import price. That's the exporter's price. It was all passed through. So one assumption is that tariffs will be passed through to import prices, not necessarily retail prices. That's another question. We didn't see this in summer of 25. We didn't see it early fall of 25, partly because a lot of manufacturers and importers were waiting to find out how long the tariffs might be applied. Right? Because if I'm a business, I don't want to raise my prices if I don't have to. I certainly don't want to be the only one in my industry sector raising my prices. So I'm going to wait as long as I can. There was uncertainty. Will there be a deal? Will there not be a deal? Will the Supreme Court help? As of this past winter, we started to see exactly this. So it was not as fast as it happened in 2017, 2018, but it was happening. 2017, the prices also were passed all the way through to the retail level. We're assuming that's going to happen. It's just been delayed. We're starting to see it now, I think. So there's two lines. I'm sure you can't see in the back. There's a light green line for prices of goods that were not tariffed, and they didn't go up. Right? It was only the price of goods that had the tariffs where you saw the price increase, the retail price increase. So the best guess, based on observations in 2017, 18, is that we will see continued price pressure because of the tariffs. That's what the Federal Reserve is looking at. That's why the Federal Reserve has not lowered interest rates very much.
This gets sticky too because all of you have encountered insurance rates going up in the last 2 years, 30% year over year. It's pretty awesome. That's part of this. It costs more to replace damaged goods. And so these tariffs are getting baked in and multiplied into the different things that you're consuming. It's not just you going to Target and picking up something and, oh, that's $2 more. It ripples through and it winds up costing you a lot more money.
Car parts, car repairs.
Car repairs.
All right, so that's the background. This is not a picture of Star Wars ships.
It's totally the
Yeah,
Star.
that's right.
Come on.
So, other questions. What happens with the tariffs? So some of the research is that on the left, I've got robot density, then import share, productivity, and employment. And 0 is about here on this particular graph on the left axis. So what it's saying is that you put tariffs on foreign goods, you actually don't see much of an increase in employment in the U.S. You might see a little bit of an increase in productivity. Imports fall a tiny bit. But it's the one on the far left that ought to get your attention. You make trade more expensive, you make imports more expensive, and labor's expensive. Different countries start automating. And that's actually, I don't know if I don't. So
Hart,
actually,
you have to say unemployment's at 4.7%.
So we'll have to come back to that.
I will have to, because what?
Don't get ahead.
Where are the people?
So, but the automation was happening. It's partly, how do I lower my cost? If you're going to tax me, I might be able to make my product more efficiently through automation. But the automation was also increasing in countries that have a net surplus, a trade surplus with the U.S. So there's that movement towards automation. So can there be a renaissance in manufacturing in the U.S.? Can we spur that with tariffs? Maybe. But it probably won't be with employment. You can bring manufacturing back to the U.S., but my plant will run in the dark with very few people.
And the irony is that the robots are not made in the United States. That's the irony.
No.
Maybe they should, right? Switzerland did it. I got a question for you on tariffs. And there's a lot of people out there with microphones that say that they're bad. But one of the real life problems is tariffs cut both ways. We have tariffs on U.S. products that cost U.S. jobs. So how do you find that balance? In other words, for example, it's easy. We have a lot of dairy farms here in Whatcom County, and we have trade barriers going into Canada that keep Whatcom County farmers from getting a better price. So I would like to see how you balance that rather than just all tariffs are bad. Because I think
No, that's a great point, because you don't want to say all tariffs are bad. And there's a list of reasons that you might want to use tariffs or other types of protections. Businesses that are crucial for national security, infant industry, there can be environmental reasons. All of those can be exaggerated and sort of used poorly. But there are a number of reasons that tariffs can be very, very useful, very important.
There's also tariffs that are put in place to offset, like you brought up the dairy industry. Dairy industry in the United States is subsidized through U.S. tax policy. And so the reason we have tariffs from Canada on our dairy products is they don't to the same level. And so from their perspective, they are trying to create an equal playing field between their producers and what is subsidized in the United States. That's from their perspective, right? And from our perspective, we do the same thing with tariffs. It's when you arbitrarily apply them without that imbalance is when you get into this discussion here where you're trying to figure out, wait, how are we matching this against that?
And you can also have tariffs imposed because you think trade deficits are bad. Trade deficits aren't necessarily bad. They're part of a bigger picture. So I think my response would be, you need to be a lot more thoughtful. You don't want to just use tariffs as a blunt instrument. More on the trade deficit in just a moment. I think we can ignore him.
Just a second. We'll get you a microphone because we do want to pick everything up for the recording.
We're okay repeating questions too.
Is this, are the graphs here just U.S. or are they international?
Are the graphs U.S. or international?
So I went the wrong way. These two graphs about prices coming through were the effective prices in the U.S. This particular graph is global. So we were seeing increased automation one of the slides that I didn't include here, South Korea, Vietnam, a number of countries. You again? Okay.
Nancy, hold on.
They're repeating the question, so it'll be picked up.
If that's international, what's just U.S. look
Pretty similar. There's not a lot of variation across countries. This particular research. These numbers are for global, and U.S. was actually automating a little bit faster than average. But within the.
The reason I asked, I think yesterday, just coincidentally, at NPR, there was an article on the automation in China and the degree of automation in their factories and the number of, or the proportion of dark factories that apparently is, I got the impression it's way higher than it is here.
They are using automation at a much higher rate in China for manufacturing because of what they're manufacturing. It's a difference between what's made, depending on the product you're making, the ability to automate different pieces change.
And Mike, I think a really important point is that the data that were for this stopped in 2022 and went back. A lot of times we're dealing with older data for some of the analysis versus what's happening right now. So
the U.S. chart has X-wings though, right? Not TIE fighters. Okay.
All right. So there's a number of issues that we would love to get into, and we can come back in the Q&A. Immigration policy. The only thing we'll say right now, well, actually, the 4 bullet points, I've got immigration policy, nationalism or populism, the dismissal of science, and the national debt all point to pretty significant headwinds, slower growth. The issue is that none of these get worked into a short-term forecast right now because of when the impacts might occur. Immigration policy. One of the things that we're seeing is that emigration of non-U.S., that's with an E, not an I, of non-U.S. born folks is now exceeding the immigration of non-U.S. So we net out migration.
All-time high of U.S. residents applying for long-term residency outside the U.S., also leaving the workforce.
Okay, so the bottom graphic didn't work. Part of it's not projecting. What we were trying to show on this bottom graphic is that if you look at job ads or properly cleaned or filtered, trying to get a handle on what's happening with job openings. There's supposed to be 2 lines on this graph, and if you look at the line for this year, it's 1,000 jobs.
It's about 1,000 to 1,200 jobs per week less being posted in Whatcom County.
Wow. Than compared to last year.
That's just Whatcom County. When we pull these numbers for the U.S. and for the state, it would floor you. It's a massive number of jobs that are just not getting posted.
All right, so wait a minute. You're saying there's far fewer jobs available.
Far fewer.
Okay. Why isn't my unemployment rate going up?
Well, if you have fewer people, so this is math. 5th grade, whoever your 5th grade math teacher was is the star of the show. At the bottom of our fraction is the total amount of the workforce. And if we're making that number smaller at the same time as making the top number smaller, we can get a low rate of unemployment.
So James, that denominator you're talking about, that who's in the workforce?
Well, that's the other problem. So we had some brilliant people graduate last year, and they've struggled to find jobs, which is true across the country. That's not abnormal. But because they've never had a job and they're not claiming unemployment.
That's one measure, one way we know who's looking for work.
They're not unemployed.
Well, they're unemployed. They're looking for work. So technically they're unemployed, but you have to ask yourself, are they actually going to be counted? Are they looking for work in a way where employment security or somebody else will find them? I mean, if they're not showing up at down at the WorkSource office, if they can't be counted, then they're not part of that denominator.
I just had a question about the total workforce number going down. Are you insinuating that that is because of outmigration, or are there other factors?
Partially, yes.
Partially because of outmigration.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
We also have people retiring, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that cause that number to shift, but the X factor is the outfall of workers leaving the United States, one way or the other. And they may not be leaving. They could just be moving from tracked employment to under-the-counter employment.
So gig work, as you call it, right? It's actually hard to count all of the people that have, sort of side businesses or working for themselves. Not all DoorDash drivers are counted, for example.
I got two hands, Hart. Right there.
So going back to that fraction that you described, that would be the same concept of testing fewer people for COVID, because then there are lower numbers and we're good, right?
I believe there's a good quote on that. We got to get these numbers down. Let's test less people. In economics, we're fancy about our fractions. We call them ratios. So they, sound a little more exotic. You have a question?
I would be curious how that broke down the out-migration across education level and skill sets.
So when we look at, the question is, when we look at our fractions that we're talking about, and we look at skill set or education on where that's being affected, and we don't have those slides today, but we do have that data be sliced up that we can see what happens. And it's interesting because for the first time since the 70s, we're actually seeing people with higher educations lose work. It's not.
So you're thinking about unemployment by training level, and the question was partly about immigration by employment level.
Right. Well, yeah, no, you definitely, we're still seeing challenges with H-1Bs and those kinds of things where we bring in highly skilled workers. So, for example, probably half of your medical staffs are here on some sort of visa. Right?
Yes, go ahead.
If we could go back to the wars for a moment, wars plural. So Gaza and Ukraine and everything going on in the Middle East, there are economic costs, but we haven't talked about climate costs. There's an immense amount of combustion of explosives and of buildings producing a lot of climate pollution. But also outside of those arenas, in places like Japan, they're combusting more coal because they're not getting the natural gas that they need. You don't have to speak to that point, but I just think there are climate costs that should be
I thought we had
considered
decided climate stuff
concurrently.
wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
And try, if we're going to do so, to ask questions of our speakers here.
Just real quickly, I went to the U.S. Census and compared working age persons to the labor force size, and it's something like 30% of working age people are not in the labor force. So the whole unemployment statistic seems to me like it's a farce.
Well, there's, before I say maybe you're right, technically we don't count the incarcerated as part of the labor force. If you're enrolled in college, grad school, or something else, you're off to the side for a little bit as well. So it's not as bad as it seems.
But the statistic you're really looking for is labor force participation rate, looking for that over time, because that will give you an idea if we're increasing or decreasing within that bubble. I always look at both. I always look at both unemployment rate and labor force participation to understand are more people going to school or more people going to prison? I don't know, whatever, right? Life choices. And so I look at both of those statistics together.
And I'm wondering what your estimation is of the statistics that you're getting from federal agencies. There's been cuts to the Labor Department, the Education Department. How valid are the figures coming to you guys that you can work with?
Well, what do you want the numbers to be? No,
you're breaking up. What?
I mean, I think we can still say with confidence, numbers from agencies like the Bureau of Labor Statistics are still very, very good. But you have to think about it carefully. And so I'm going to come back to your point in just a couple of slides, because it's really important that you know what the data are showing, what they don't show, and how they're collected. We may, depending on time, we may get into, and this I think really plays to your question, in that response rates for the surveys that Bureau of Labor Statistics and others do are way down. And so part of what's happening is that the bands of uncertainty, the confidence intervals around any given number have gone up. And people aren't really talking about that very much.
Some of the census data coming out is a plus or minus 40%.
Oh.
Makes my job easier, though, because then I can just make numbers up.
Okay. And he does. So a quick comment on the national debt. On the
hold up, Hart. Dismissal of science. National Science Foundation, halfway through their budget year, has released 15% of the funding for the year. 15%. There is no way they're releasing all that funding for the year.
Is that my dismissal of science?
Yeah, other than the dismal science, which is what we practice.
I spelled it. I spelled dismal wrong. So the national debt, the graphic on the right is the deficits that are projected. So it goes out to 2036. We're right here now, and it's just not a lot of confidence that things are going to get a lot better. But you can put graphics like this up, and oh my gosh, it's terrible. Should I panic?
Are people buying it?
Well,
are we making the payments?
So when are the problems going to hit? The problems that we worry about with the national debt is, when do people that buy U.S. bonds, in other words, when do people that are savers in particular, that are lending money to the U.S., when do they say, I'm a little worried about your ability to repay your debt?
This China debt looks pretty good.
You're going to have
over
to
here.
give me a higher interest rate to get me to lend you money. I'll say that ain't going to be a problem for a while.
And folks, the rate he's talking about is not the Fed funds rate, which I talked about earlier, and you all groaned when I said maybe they'll increase that. That has little to do with your life. This does. The 10-year Treasury very closely tracks the mortgage rates. The 30-year Treasury tracks the other things. So these open market assessments by just regular folks are really the interest rates you should be worried about, and you have zero control.
And I'm saying that the national debt is not going to change those rates
unless
soon. You think port shipments are sticky. The role of the U.S. dollar in the global economy is sticky. That's not going to change appreciably. Perhaps even more important is our debt's going up. But this picture looks similar for France, Germany. So relatively speaking, we're not going to be looking that much scarier. We're still the cleanest dirty shirt in the laundry. But here's something to watch. And the worry in some of the press, could people decide sort of an anti-U.S. trade?
Sell the U.S.
So keep an eye on 10-year Treasury yields, 10-year Treasury returns. We talk about the debt, but some of the problems that we imagine are debt-related could appear for other reasons. All right, transitioning.
Now to the local desk.
So Washington State, and as we go from the U.S. to the state to the region, we start losing data. You can talk about GDP at the state level or even the local level, but it's not nearly as meaningful. The GDP numbers, Whatcom County, for example, are driven heavily by oil. Just where's the dollar? What are the big dollar amounts? So we don't talk about a Washington GDP, but income growth in the state, unemployment rate. So employment growth in Washington, actually very muted, but a little above the national average if you go state by state. Unemployment here, a little higher than the national average. We put 30-year mortgage rates. There's no such thing as a Washington mortgage rate separate from an Oregon mortgage rate.
There should be.
But we put them just as a reminder that there's not a lot of expectation of mortgage rates coming down. As James said, they're really tied to 10-year Treasury yields.
But are these high? Like from a historical perspective, is a 6% mortgage, a 5.5% mortgage, is that outlandish?
Let me see. If I look across the room, Sam's going to say yes, they're high based on his lived experience. Mike? He still says low.
Yeah.
He remembers the 80s.
Most of them anyway.
But for right now, that line on the forecast says to us, expect a bit of a stall in the housing market. You know, you'll see, even as more houses come on the market, pricing is going to be a little bit difficult given those rates.
What changes, if any, to these numbers do you expect to see based upon what we're calling the millionaire's tax?
Gosh, I'd rather talk about AI.
You're the boss.
No, I mean, the millionaire's tax, whenever we say, you know, in economics, you raise the price of something, you expect people to do less of it.
But the problem is that it's a relatively small number of people.
But they matter on some of the tax revenue side. I think my worry, and I'll go off script for a moment, you've got changes to the estate tax on top of a bit of a capital gains tax. And now you're adding a type of income tax. I'm not supposed to call it that.
It's an excise tax.
There. That's what he said.
It's a tax on transactions, just like you have for sales tax. Functionally, right? We think of it like an income tax, but it really is a tax based on transactions.
Seattle and the state of Washington enjoyed rather incredible growth, both in jobs and in income from, let's just say, 2010 to 2019, 2020. I think we take it for granted, but you're making it harder for entrepreneurs and small business owners. So I don't think the exodus will be huge. I don't think the millionaire's tax will change these numbers that much, or even appreciably. But
yeah, I don't expect much difference. And honestly,
but I still worry because we're not looking at tax reform holistically from issues of adequacy, fairness, and so on. And there's not a comprehensive review. It's piecemeal, and piecemeal that makes certain things more expensive. And
the real conversation would clear out the room really fast, because you got to start over and look at all taxes and remap it out. And that makes everyone go, oh, yeah, but then you're going to do this. And then the discussion falls apart.
We need you to be a little louder, please.
Well, I could.
Oh, God, don't say that.
The real discussion when it comes to taxes in Washington State would clear a room pretty fast, because the reality is it needs to be remapped. We have, as a state, as a population, as a workforce, as a group of companies, we have such large-scale structural changes that our tax policies have not kept up. But the problem with that is no one has the faith and trust to have that discussion.
Well, I mean, if you change something, any type of tax reform, somebody's going to pay more.
That is the idea. Some people pay more and some people pay less.
But I don't want to pay more.
Well, amen.
All right. Job growth.
Do you have some sauce for this spaghetti?
That's mean. So this is job growth in the state of Washington, and we chose a handful of the larger sectors, and I just arbitrarily picked 2019 to present. Nothing magical about it.
Nothing happened in 2020?
Okay, well, maybe. And you can see the upper light blue, funny blue, that's information technology. And
it's pretty good growth rate there for Washington State.
And I like I said, we tremendous growth at Microsoft, Amazon, et cetera, through the early part of the decade, through the teens. COVID hits, work from home. So they still, but you get to 2022 and you're starting to see some weakness in the tech. Professional business services, the fuchsia sort of line going along with that. also stalling for the last few years. Lots of sectors, fewer workers today than in 2019. Manufacturing, construction.
Got to have that 4.7 unemployment. Fewer workers.
The green line in the middle going up, healthcare. Fastest growing sector in the U.S., and we're no exception. At the state level and local level.
But Hart, at the local level, if we looked at those top three nice, that blue and the pink and the green, here locally, it's really the green line.
Well, and here's local, and I'm sorry, we don't get the data to say a time series of data. I don't have the data to plot what's going on in the information sector in Whatcom County, exactly what's going on in the healthcare sector in Whatcom County. Some of it's suppressed for confidentiality reasons, and some of it the state just doesn't have the volume of data to give estimates.
I didn't see ag on that, agriculture on that. So what's happening with that?
Sleight of hand. And I should have said non-farm employment. So employment in Washington, ag in Washington is still less than 4%. It's a very, very small sector. Matters economically, culturally, et cetera. But in terms of number of jobs, Whatcom County, it's less than 2.5%. So anyway, this is the total jobs non-farm. Thank you for the clarification in Whatcom County.
It looks kind of flat there, Hart.
Well, so some manually added trend lines. And I've been at the center for a while. And if you look at the 2000, this goes, I'm sorry, for those in the back, this goes from 2000 to end of 2025. So if you look at 2000 to the financial crisis or just after the financial crisis to COVID, everybody thought I was smart. I made these, I think Whatcom County employment is going to go up 2% because the slope of those red lines on the left is 2%. It wasn't really that hard. Okay, but from COVID, from 2022 on, we flatlined. And so we have to be thinking about what's going on locally. We don't have the same sort of job growth. We can look deeper into the economy. We do have the data to take snapshots. We can look at particular periods in time. And this is the second quarter of last year. So almost a year ago. So for those in the back, I've got construction, manufacturing, retail, information, and then some others.
But remember that 2 of the 3 big growth lines for Washington State were info and professional business services. We don't have the people for those jobs. We don't have the jobs.
And we don't have the employers.
Ergo, we have not had the growth.
So, and also for those in the back, the ones on the left, construction, manufacturing, and retail, go from almost 9%, 10%, and 11%. So government out here on the far right has actually come down. It used to be 17, 18%. Healthcare has gone up in recent years. Government's come down a tiny bit, but it's still 16% of the jobs.
When you say government, you're talking county permits, right? That's the building permit people? Because there's way too many of them.
Assessor's office.
Yeah.
Permitting.
Yeah. Not
mayor's staff.
Not K-12.
So
casinos.
People always look at a graph like this and they say, "Oh my God, what's going on? Why are we so heavy?" Every smaller economy, and we're a small economy, some of the dominant employers are K-12, local government,
casinos.
Your favorite blackjack dealer
is a government employee.
Tribal gets counted in government. So
this is why you should not do statistics on your own.
All right. So if we add earnings, so the red line is earnings, the blue lines are just like they were before, because some people are going to ask, well, what are the most important sectors? Which sectors really drive the local economy? What do you mean by number of jobs? Do you mean by earnings? How do you want to think about it? And you can see that a couple of sectors like construction on the far left, earning a larger share of the earnings than employment. And then the third one flips for retail, not shocking there. So it's...
I always think it's funny, the government, so we told you, a huge portion of the government is K-12, right? And people say teachers are so underpaid. Okay, let's follow that hat for a minute. That's a huge percentage of wages in Whatcom County. What does that tell you about the rest of the wages? So then you could put the other hat on and say teachers are overpaid.
No, we're not.
And, right?
All right. I'm going to bounce back and forth. So this is Whatcom County. Same graph, King County.
Wait, there's some differences here.
Whatcom County, King County.
You know, those info jobs are 6-figure jobs, entry level.
So 18% of the jobs in King County are in information and professional technical services compared to about 6% here. But it gets even more fun. For those of you in the back, the average wage in the information sector in Whatcom County is $136,000.
400?
400,000 in King County.
That 300,000, that $1.3 million bungalow starts to become really affordable in Seattle.
I'm just going to pause here, let this sink in.
You know, we spoiled because we see this data all the time, and then we come out and we do these talks, and people are like,
All right, first off, don't compare Bellingham and Seattle. Fundamentally different beasts, right?
far better traffic here than Seattle.
So we get asked, we can talk about King County, and it's important. It's important to think about the differences and so on. But when we start thinking about the data, we start thinking about what are some comparisons that would be meaningful. And I think there's somebody from the Cascadia Daily News here, and I'm not picking just on CDN because
we could make a list.
I was at a meeting at the port, and somebody from the city had the same citation, and Bellingham Herald had an article, same citation. Is Bellingham the least affordable city in terms of housing in the U.S.? Lots of places have said so.
Well, we had the highest job growth in 1 month. I mean, you know.
So we're going to play with that. And I'm going to come back to be careful with the, make sure the comparisons are meaningful. We're going to talk about a peer city study where we compare what's going on in Bellingham to places like Santa Cruz, Flagstaff, Burlington, Vermont, Savannah, Georgia.
And before you're like, wait, I've been to Savannah. We're not Savannah, Georgia. We did this using GIS tools. And so we actually built a model construct of what Bellingham looked like based on different things that are here, attributes like having a university, not being a major metropolitan area, et cetera. And then we did a scan across the country and identified communities that matched within a bubble of those same parameters. So from a scientific perspective, they are peer cities. But if you go there, you'll have a different experience.
All right, but first, again, odd projection. Top line is household income in Whatcom County. This is data from FRED, the Federal Reserve's economic database, and it's using census data. Check the time really quick. The bottom was Skagit County. So in 2024, there were some announcements for household income in 2023 just came out. And everybody was all in a kerfuffle because household income in Whatcom County fell $10,000.
Hey, we found that $10,000. It was just down the street.
It went up $12,000 in Skagit County when there was no change in major employment, no change in jobs, no change in wages. But there were changes. Remember how we had a question in the back just a little bit ago about how reliable are some of the data and so on. So before COVID, some of the response rates from places like Census for their surveys were 60, 70%. You go through COVID, and I blame the younger generation. They don't answer their phone. Survey response rates fell to 30%.
Those of you who know statistics, your plus or minus just went up exponentially.
So one of the ways that Census was dealing with this issue was, well, gosh, they recognized that the response rates for low-income households was lower than the response rates from higher-income households. And to try to make things a little bit more representative, they put a heavier weight on response rates from lower income households. 2023 data comes out. Oops, more responses from lower income households. Times that extra weight, and it made it look like the data had changed appreciably. Anyway, be careful, because the picture is still gloomy. The census folks will remind you their sample sizes are very, very small for any 1 year estimate. They ask you to use a 3 or a 5 year rolling estimate, and so on and so forth. So they're aware of this. Most of the rest of us aren't, but that's okay. So thinking about house prices regionally really quickly, and I apologize for different numbers. I don't have average annual wage per worker for 2025 yet. That data will be out very soon. So I'm still using 2024. And I just went with some data out here on the right because there's two different ways of looking at housing affordability. And I was using some of the most recent data that I could get when we were working on this. So in the first three columns, you can look at what's the ratio of home price to wages. Whatcom County down at the bottom doesn't look so great. Or the affordability index. Affordability index would be 100. Higher numbers are more affordable. And it would be 100 if the person or the household with the median income could afford the median priced home with all sorts of assumptions about how much you're supposed to spend on housing and so on. So, yay, we win. I don't think we wanted to win.
Well, okay, so Whatcom is definitely...
Question. Median home price. Hold on. Wait a minute, please. Hold on. We got you.
Does median home price refer to tax assessed value of homes or actual purchase price?
Oh, get her a cookie.
Oh, you just got him going again. Everybody else get a cookie.
And maybe a stiff drink. These are homes that closed. And the problem we have when we talk about median home values is that we don't sell the same homes every month. We're not talking about Snickers bars. There's different homes at different prices. And so you could have a really high median home value one month and a really low the next month, just based on who decided to buy what and what was available. So we have to be careful when we talk about median and average and really unpacking what that means. So no, it's not assessed value. It's actual transactions.
And it's not true that Whatcom County is always the least affordable. Quarter to quarter, it bounces a little bit. Some quarters, King County is actually less affordable because of what homes are actually selling.
Island County was the least affordable one month, and I had to talk down King 5 on a satellite truck because they were ready to call, and it was two properties. It was two properties that made them the least affordable county in the state. And it was just like, it was just these two. And I said, these aren't going to sell again next month. Oh, well, we're already here. All right.
So one quick question before you move over on the question of averages versus median. Why do you quote average income? Because that influences the big outliers, right? The high wage earners versus median for the other statistics.
Go back to your slide for a second.
Well, the simple answer is because we can easily get data on median home values, and all we can get on income or wages is average. We can get total, and we can divide it by number of workers. We don't get data on the distribution.
I will say average for workers isn't as bad as you think, because really high earned like Howard Schultz, he didn't have a high earned income. He had a lot of stock options and a lot of things that gave him money, but his actual W-2 income was not massive. And so it doesn't get as inflated as you would think. The other thing that we do that we're very careful with is that we actually look at, this is average wage per worker. We actually will look at household income as well, because then it's a household making a choice. Do you have one really high wage earner? Do you have two medium wage earners? Do you have six really low wage?
Yeah,
whatever the choice is.
More on that in just a second. So again, Bellingham, the is not the most expensive housing in the U.S. for a city its size. In fact, in our peer cities, it's number 3. Santa Cruz is the outlier at the highest. Flagstaff, from a housing affordability perspective, actually has bigger problems than Bellingham. Any of the cities that are also tourism-based or have natural assets and are attractive and so on have expensive housing. But we beat everybody else, if there's any consolation in that. One of the things that's really interesting when we were doing the peer city study is that rents were really, really comparable across all peer cities. Bellingham did not stand out as having high rent. But from a home purchase perspective, big challenges. Other categories in this cost of living study that gets done regularly, and we were using some of the data, groceries are more expensive here. Healthcare is more expensive here. The biggest outlier was miscellaneous items. Some clothing, tennis balls, in case you're really worried, are in that category. But we're about 20% above the national average.
But then again, we're about 20% below the cost for utilities.
That's changing quickly.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely changing. But so when we think of cost of living, we shouldn't just cherry pick one item.
So the question, and James, you started to talk about household income. When we were wondering about rents and housing affordability, one of the questions that we were asked is Bellingham a low wage city? Or is our wages somewhat depressed in Whatcom County? So the census gives us data on median household income and mean, so it gets to your point. But we can also look at per capita income. Orange is the peer city average. The blue is Whatcom County. And there was none of the data, from the data that we could collect, none of the data said there's a wage problem. When you're looking at small college towns, we look really similar in terms of wages, in terms of some other things. So, digging a little bit deeper, employment growth has been between 0 and 0.5% for the last several years. We think that continues. Chris, I think you mentioned it at the introduction. When you think about who are the drivers of employment growth in Whatcom County and who are the large employers in its Western Peace Health and so on, real challenges from state budgets to healthcare financing. And healthcare is not a high-wage job, by the way. Overall, the category is healthcare and social assistance. Yes, there are orthopedic surgeons and others, but there are far more home health aides, nurses, and so on. Cost of living, we don't see that being, it's hard to address from a policy perspective. Population growth continues, and we've already talked about that fund ratio. Yeah.
Fancy.
With more people coming, less job growth, our unemployment rate here is going to stay higher than the state than King County, stay higher than the national average.
Well, with the what do you see as the role of continuing tariffs and the depression of Canadian tourism in Whatcom County to the numbers that we're looking at there?
Doesn't help.
The bigger impact to the slower Canadian traffic is actually to our local government budgets.
Retail sales, tax revenue.
It's a significant hit to our local budgets.
On a couple of comments on wage growth, but trying to pull back, and we appreciate the questions along the way. But as we finish, I think this may be our last slide, unless we come into. We always carry around an extra slide or two, and if you fail,
you never know.
But remember, the national forecast was fairly optimistic because of the tailwinds with AI spending, tax cuts, which should spur business investment. There's some assumptions about productivity growth, and I put some question marks because James, you're worried about that AI spending. The tax cuts, it's a near-term boost, but makes you think again about national debt.
Well, we've already figured out where you're going to spend it. At the gas station. Sorry, I had to work that in.
God, terrible. And I think coming back to your question about tariffs and even the Canadian boycott, we see a number of of headwinds. Again, immigration policy, it's affecting who's leaving, who's coming, and it's affecting the unemployment rates. It's not showing up yet in the GDP numbers. Debt, same thing. Uncertainty with who's visiting, uncertainty about oil prices, uncertainty about tariffs matters. It means slower business investment. Okay.
Yes. Oh, am I on?
You're on.
Oh, good. So I've lived here 68 years. I'm leaving. And when we look at all the statistics, it almost seems like you're not recognizing how bad the housing affordability has gotten here. And I realize you've written some wonderful stuff. I encourage everybody to read it because these guys do work with facts, which is handy in our political environment. But here's the central question for Whatcom County. Even though I'm leaving, this is my home. How do you make a case to an employer that starts out with, we have one of the worst business environments in the nation? Okay, that's the business environment, the taxation environment, because we're seeing a mass migration. Okay, that's the first part. The second part is every employer has to pay enough wages for people to pay their rent. How do you make a case to an employer with this high housing cost? Because it looks to me like major employers are migrating to low tax, low housing cost states.
I'll throw out two ideas while she walks the mic over, and neither of them will amount to a truly good answer. One of them is not just policy change, but a cultural shift. I mean, if I can name a medical clinic in town that doesn't pay its staff health benefits, it's all of us needing to think about what is it that we're trying to accomplish. What do we want? And another thought is there are lots of places that are high tax but still high growth, and people aren't leaving. How do you make it so somebody says, yeah, we pay a fair bit in taxes here, but I like what I get?
Okay, so Hart, Washington State ranks in the bottom of the top third of states' tax per capita. So we are not
tax revenue per capita.
Tax revenue per capita. The stuff you see online that say we have this high tax rate, that's marginal rate. Nobody pays marginal rate. That's not a real number. So our tax rate is not terrible. We used to be in the bottom half, and now we are towards the top of the bottom half. Now we're at the bottom of the top third. So we've come up a little bit. Washington State continues to be the 6th fastest growing state in the country. So people are not leaving and not being replaced. Right? So we're seeing shifts.
And I'll get back, you get back to the comprehensive tax reform, because, I can look at my property taxes and say, oh my gosh, if I'm working and I don't pay income tax, I'm like, okay, it's a bit, as soon as I retire, I'll think about leaving, right? So we've got to have some better discussions on adequacy, fairness. There's some hands up. If you guys keep making us talk about taxes, I'm leaving. Nice.
So how is the proliferation of AI affecting job growth or decline and household income in the future?
At this point in time, AI growth is more a talking point than a impact to jobs. We are seeing a lot of companies talk about that they're not going to potentially hire people because of AI, but not seeing mass layoffs outside of the tech sector.
I was saying in tech, which you do see in the numbers in Seattle.
Right, which is ironic, really, right?
That decline in info and tech.
But it's a long-term question that we'll have to see if is it added productivity and continued low unemployment rate, in which case there was no impact. All it does is add to GDP.
Well, we argue about whether AI will be labor replacing or labor enhancing.
So you identify tailwinds with respect to AI. You identify tailwinds with respect to the economy, AI. Do you see a scenario in which AI actually becomes a headwind?
Well, so
for the economy.
The tailwind is because of the massive investments, hundreds of billions of dollars, right?
Okay, and then the potential headwind is, gosh, I just borrowed $1 billion to build my data center or whatever, and I'm going to make $100 million on it. So there's a real risk that there's a bit of a reckoning on the spending, that the current generation of AI is not as productive and product enhancing, and doesn't give the return to the businesses. And it will in time, but there's a real chance of a pretty sizable bump along the way. And then that tailwind does become a headwind.
The AI investment horizon is about another 2 years of when we expect to see this large hundreds of billions of dollars going into this. And when I say 100, I mean like 600, 700 billion dollars. That will go away within the next 3 years. It tails off. And then we're back to labor questions around what's the return on that investment.
Isn't it true that there's a lot of different AI companies and they're not all going to make it?
Well, that's true of shoe companies too.
That's going to be huge.
Yeah.
People are investing in different companies and losing their money.
Right. And so if you're invested in the stock market in those companies, that's a risk exposure to you, right? But that's not
I mean, there if history, the expression history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And you look at .com, internet, you look at electricity, if you look at, there's a whole host of technological changes. And in every instance, there's speculation, and then a handful of the companies or more don't make it, but we plod forward.
I have a wild card question we haven't touched on yet today is cryptocurrency and its effect on like the strength of the US dollar and what that might do to the national economy. I know that's probably an entire course.
I mean, there's a lot to be said for blockchain technology and its role and how that can ripple through the financial sector. Could there become a safe cryptocurrency? Right now, all I can say is it's really, really hard to figure out how to value a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or any of the others. It's very speculative. I don't know too many people that want to buy and sell too much on something that's not backed. And
and that is the last mile, right? The stable coin, something backed by the Treasury that is tied to some sort of stable currency.
Yeah, because we are moving towards a digital world for sure.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's not a bad thing. The crypto on a surface level, blockchain makes trade easier. It reduces costs. It reduces barriers in a lot of ways. It also opens up a lot of fraud and a lot of really interesting international intrigue around who's getting money from where. It's very deregulated. And so it's a good and a bad. And you're right. It's a course on its own.
We have 5 more minutes, gentlemen, for your presentation, which is we would all sit here for another hour if we could. But I'm hoping that you'll take the next 5 minutes and just tell us what you want us to take away from today and what you think the most important points are.
Have ice cream early. Oh.
I mean, I think we'll bounce around. One of the takeaways is make sure you're looking at long-term trends, not single data points. There was a whole topic that we didn't really get into. James, you'll have to help me with the numbers. In early February, the numbers came out for jobs created in the U.S. in January.
150-some thousand jobs added in January. Christmas miracle.
And then in early March, the numbers came out for the jobs created in the U.S.
Negative 90-some thousand.
92. In case you were.
So if you average those together, it works out to about 30,000, which is up to 15,000 a month, which just happens crazily to be the average last year of how many jobs we actually grew per month on average across the year.
So the variability month to month, variability in any data point any one data point can be distracting. Be careful with the data.
And the jobs numbers, they had to walk back over 500,000 jobs last year, right? So don't go freaking out when they release the jobs numbers the first time out. We get 6 months of revisions.
One of the things when you look at 15,000 jobs a month, and people say, well, historically it's been closer to 50. Don't we need 50 to keep up with population growth and so on? Remember the immigration stuff. Used to be 50 was necessary. Lately, it's not.
4.7%.
Demographics and the immigration problem. So trends, not individual data points. Be a good consumer of data. Don't look at just one point. Look at several and have some sense of what the data show and don't show.
Next slide.
And the one in the sort of the we threw this on the coordination. I mean, we don't want to get into economic development, but it's Pacific Northwest is a funny thing. I just got back from North Carolina where cities are combining their chambers and they're trying to coordinate. They're trying to say, gosh, one example is that Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and High Point, North Carolina know they can't compete head-to-head as a city with, say, Charlotte. But as a region, they can figure out what they're doing, and we don't talk about that very much. And a long-term view, what assets do you want to highlight? And it can be natural capital, natural environment. It can also be infrastructure for businesses. Without trying to pick winners and losers, without trying to pick a particular business, you say, I want this business on our waterfront. How do you create something? It gets back to some of the questions about culture. How do you get people to stay in the face of whatever the taxes might be? The other takeaway is I would say, get ready for a lower growth world. It's not necessarily a bad thing. So there's no value statement there, but I think if U.S. bonds are a little bit less appealing to the rest of the world, higher interest rates. Cars are more expensive. Lots of things are more expensive. Immigration policy, less support for R&D, less support for the environment. All that points to slower growth. So plan for that and eat ice cream, like you were saying.
Early. So you have that slide with that's our email addresses, but you can find us on the internet. Next slide.
I hate this slide. I'm the Luddite in the family.
We maintain a very, very, very active social media profile. So you can follow us on your favorite Vice. We post 6 to 8 articles per day, 7 days a week. We post out roundups every week of the U.S. economy. We post out stuff we don't agree with and post why we don't agree with it. We don't really engage in a lot of discussion online, but you will have a lot of discussion with the people around you. So take a look at that. And then once a quarter, we sit down and we do a podcast and we just talk through, we publish a regional forecast. And so 30 days after we publish that, which is this week, we'll sit down and we will actually talk about what we got right, what we didn't get right, and what's kind of morphed since then. So you can find that on pretty much any of the podcast platforms for when you can't sleep at night.
And I would just like to add, I'm Jane Bright. I'm the program committee chair, and that is a real privilege. Thank you. And I wanted, before we wrap up with these gentlemen, this slide will be available. We do videos of all our programs, and those will include the slide there. I see a lot of people taking pictures, but it will be available on the video. And before we do a formal thank you, I want to build on what Jill was saying about next programs, about the NUCSAC and all the challenges there, which include the international challenge. The NUCSAC does not affect just us. It affects British Columbia as well, which leads to our May program, which is the New World Order, Canada's Perspective. And we have Speaker Edwin Alland, who is a senior fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations, and Craig Rachel, Council General of Canada, who will be here. June's a work in progress. July is the authoritarian month. And then we're off to the races for the election season, and which I didn't know. Jill was the one who brought this to our attention. We have 9 Supreme Court justices in the state of Washington. So the Washington Supreme Court, 9 positions, 5 of which are either turning over or on the ballot. And we will know, how many are contested and so forth in a couple weeks, but we will arm you with information about all that as part of election season, which also includes, the 2 Newport commissions and the 42nd state senator Sharon Shoemake is not running, and that's going to be a lively contest. And there are going to be some fairly controversial initiatives on the ballot too. So we will do our very best to get you prepared for election season as well.
And we thank you for having us.
Yeah, and we thank these gentlemen. Thank you so much. I have a little gift for you. A little gift for you. And thank you. And for those of you who want to join today, our accountant, our board member, it is tax season. He'll be here for another 15 minutes. But if you'd like to join today, Zach is up there in the green shirt. Thank you all so much.
And if you'd be so kind, please bus your table. We're all volunteers, so we'd appreciate it if you take care of your dishes. Thank you.